Microsoft ended support for Windows 10 in late 2025 and informed hundreds of millions of users worldwide that their computers were no longer adequate to run Windows 11. Not because those machines had stopped working, not because they could no longer run modern software, because they lacked a specific hardware security chip called TPM2. 0, because their CPU predated an arbitrary Microsoft cutoff, or because they had less than 64 gigabytes of installed storage. Those machines, most of which ran Windows 10 perfectly well and handled every modern application without difficulty, were told they had 3 options: buy new hardware meeting Microsoft's specifications, pay Microsoft for extended security updates at a cost that makes no sense for an ordinary consumer machine, or accept that the operating system protecting their data was no longer receiving patches against new vulnerabilities. Windows News confirmed in its May 2026 analysis that Linux offers what Windows in 2026 cannot: total sovereignty over your own computing environment, with no telemetry, no forced online account requirements, no advertising integrations baked into the operating system itself, and no company making unilateral decisions that hardware you own is no longer supported. Starry Hope's January 2026 confirmed market analysis documented the direct consequence. Linux desktop usage crossed 5% in the United States for the first time, reaching approximately 7% globally, and representing a 70% increase in a single year. That 70% growth is the direct and measurable consequence of one product decision by one company. Every person who looked at their functioning machine, looked at Microsoft's requirements, and decided not to spend money on a replacement was handed a reason to consider Linux that years of community advocacy had never produced. This video makes the honest case for making that switch in 2026, with every real barrier named directly and every real improvement documented and confirmed. The Windows 11 hardware requirement barrier is more financially significant in 2026 than it was when Microsoft first announced the cutoff, because the hardware market has moved in exactly the wrong direction for users who were planning to upgrade. How to Geek's December 2025 confirmed analysis documented the hardware pricing situation. DRAM prices surged 171% year over year, according to Tom's hardware data. DDR5 RAM kits that cost around $100 in mid-2025 were approaching $200 by late 2025. NVIDIA cut production by 30 to 40%, according to PC Gamer data in the same analysis. SSD prices were rising alongside RAM. The practical consequence is that buying new hardware to meet Windows 11's requirements in 2026 costs considerably more than it would have cost in 2024 or 2023. The financial argument for Linux, specifically the confirmed fact that a Linux installation generally runs faster than Windows 11 on the same hardware, was a theoretical advantage in years when upgrading components was affordable. In 2026, it became a concrete financial decision. Keep the machine you already have, install Linux, and get better performance than Windows 11 would have delivered on that same hardware, without spending money on components whose prices have nearly doubled. How to Geek confirmed this performance advantage directly in its December 2025 analysis. A Linux PC generally runs faster on the same machine than Windows 11 does. That advantage compounds when the machine in question is 5 or 6 years old and was running Windows 10 comfortably right up until Microsoft told it the party was over. The hardware price surge makes this a 2026 story in a way it was not in 2023 or 2024. In previous years, the performance argument for Linux was countered with the practical point that buying faster hardware was always an option. In 2026, buying faster hardware means paying nearly double for RAM and significantly more for storage than users paid 2 years earlier, with no confirmed timeline for component prices to stabilize. The economic case for Linux has never been as strong as it is in 2026, and it arrived at exactly the moment when more users than at any previous point in the history of personal computing had been given a direct and involuntary reason to look for an alternative to the operating system they had been using by default for years. The software and application situation that was Linux's most significant weakness has changed more dramatically between 2024 and 2026 than at any point in the preceding decade. How to Geek's December 2025 confirmed analysis documented the shift in detail. The Linux application gap has closed for the majority of users whose workflows do not depend on specific Windows-exclusive applications. LibreOffice covers the full core Office productivity suite, including word processing, spreadsheets, and presentations. Every major web-based collaboration tool, including Slack, Zoom, Discord, Google Docs, and Microsoft Teams in the browser, works identically on Linux because these tools run in a browser rather than as platform-specific native applications. DaVinci Resolve has confirmed native Linux support and is one of the most widely used professional video editing applications and commercial post-production workflows globally. The professional creative software gap has narrowed from a general Linux weakness to a specific and well-documented set of vendor decisions by specific companies. Adobe has not released native Linux versions of Creative Cloud applications, and for users who depend specifically on Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, or After Effects, that gap remains real and currently unavoidable. For the growing proportion of professionals and everyday users whose workflows do not require those specific Adobe applications, the barrier has effectively closed. The majority of people who used Windows primarily for browsing, email, Office documents, video calls, and media consumption can migrate to Linux today and find that every application they actually use daily is available, works correctly, and in many cases performs noticeably faster than it did under Windows on the same hardware. The practical test for whether Linux covers a specific user's daily workflow is not reading a compatibility list or watching comparison videos. It is booting a live USB for 30 minutes and opening every application in the actual daily routine. If everything opens and works correctly in that session, the migration is viable for that user on that machine. That test takes less time than arguing about compatibility online, and it produces a definitive personal answer rather than a general claim. The gaming situation on Linux in 2026 is the most improved and most carefully documented aspect of the Windows versus Linux comparison. XDA Developers 2026 confirmed analysis documented what the Steam Deck accomplished for Linux gaming. It brought millions of gamers to Linux who never consciously chose it, who picked up the device, played their libraries, loved the experience, and never thought about the operating system running beneath it. That invisible adoption changed the economics of Linux gaming fundamentally by demonstrating to developers and anti-cheat vendors that Linux was a real, paying, and rapidly growing gaming market that could no longer be treated as negligible. The remaining hard wall is kernel-level anti-cheat. Make Use's February 2026 confirmed gaming analysis stated the consequence directly. Close to half of the top 15 most popular games on Twitch at any given moment will not run on Linux. Valorant uses kernel-level Vanguard anti-cheat that does not currently support Linux. Certain easy anti-cheat configurations block Linux at the kernel level. Starry Hope's January 2026 analysis confirmed the key technical reality. These are developer motivation decisions, not engineering limitations. Developers who have enabled Linux anti-cheat support confirm it works correctly. The economic calculation changes as Linux market share grows, and the 70% adoption increase in 2025 is the kind of growth that changes those calculations. For users whose primary gaming library runs on Proton with Gold compatibility, Linux is a complete and capable gaming platform right now in 2026. For users whose most played competitive games require kernel-level anti-cheat that does not yet support Linux, the honest answer is that barrier is real, specific, confirmed by the research, and currently outside their individual control to resolve on their own. The timeline for that barrier to change is tied directly to the Linux gaming market share numbers. The 70% adoption growth in 2025 that Starry Hope documented is the kind of growth that changes developer calculations. Anti-cheat vendors who previously had no financial reason to invest in Linux support now face a market that is measurably and growing faster than any comparable platform shift in recent memory. The games that are currently blocked are not permanently blocked. They are currently blocked because the market had not yet reached the size that justifies the investment. The growth rate documented in 2025 suggests that calculation is changing. For users waiting on those specific titles, the wait is shorter in 2026 than it was in 2024. The privacy and security argument for Linux over Windows in 2026 has become more concrete than ever because Microsoft's additions to Windows 11 in 2026 are not hypothetical privacy concerns. They are confirmed implemented features. Windows News' May 2026 confirmed analysis documented what Microsoft has built into Windows 11 in 2026. Copilot AI features integrated into nearly every corner of the interface that are difficult to permanently remove. A recall feature that takes periodic screenshots of everything displayed on screen and stores them locally for AI-powered search, forced Microsoft account requirements for the standard Home Edition setup flow, and telemetry collection that is enabled by default and difficult to fully disable even for technically experienced users. Linux's confirmed position is the direct opposite of every one of those design decisions. Windows News confirmed that Linux offers total sovereignty with no system-level telemetry, no advertising integrations, and no forced online account requirements to operate your own machine. Linux security. Com's March 2026 confirmed analysis of the Linux security landscape documented the security architecture. Linux distributions rely on mandatory access controls, including SE-Linux and AppArmor, combined with a principle of least privilege that limits what each running process can access on the system. AppArmor in enforcing mode and a UFW firewall with default deny incoming rules produce a desktop with a minimal and auditable attack surface that Windows 11's default architecture does not match. The user who switches to Linux in 2026 is not trading convenience for privacy. They are getting better performance on existing hardware without new spending, access to the same applications they actually use in their daily workflow, a gaming library that covers over 80% of Steam's top titles, and a privacy posture that Windows 11 specifically and deliberately did not offer. The recall feature Microsoft introduced in Windows 11, which takes periodic screenshots of everything displayed on screen and stores them locally for AI-based search and indexing, represents a category of surveillance-adjacent functionality that Linux simply does not have an equivalent of. There is no Linux recall. There's no Linux Copilot integrated at the OS level taking screenshots of your screen. There is no company in the Linux development model with a financial interest in your on-screen activity. That is not a minor architectural distinction. It is the fundamental and structural difference between an operating system designed to work for the user and one designed to work for the company that shipped it. The migration from Windows to Linux is more practical in 2026 than at any previous point in the platform's history, and the distributions that make it most accessible have been built specifically to reduce the friction that previously discouraged mainstream users. The distributions worth knowing for a first migration are 3, and the choice between them comes down to one question about what the user's primary daily use case actually is. Linux Mint is the most consistently recommended for users migrating from Windows. Because its desktop layout is familiar, its hardware compatibility is among the broadest of any distribution, its software center works without command line knowledge, and its development team has explicitly and consistently prioritized stability and approachable user experience. Fedora is the choice for users who want a more current system with more recent package versions, backed by Red Hat's engineering quality, with a reliable 6-month release cadence and strong community documentation. Bazite is the choice for users whose primary concern is gaming because it ships with Proton and gaming-specific kernel and driver optimizations pre-configured out of the box, delivering the same Steam Deck-class gaming experience directly on a standard desktop PC. Starting the migration requires 3 steps. Download the ISO for the distribution that fits the use case, write it to a USB drive using Balena Etcher or Ventoy, and boot from that USB drive to run the complete operating system live before committing to any permanent installation. Every mainstream Linux distribution supports running the complete operating system live from USB without touching the existing Windows installation. The first session is completely non-destructive and can be used to confirm that Wi-Fi, audio, display, and peripheral hardware all function correctly on the specific machine, and to open every application in the actual daily workflow to confirm it is present and functional. Starry Hope's January 2026 confirmed analysis that documented Linux's 70% adoption growth in 2025 also confirmed the key driver of that growth. Windows 10. End of support pushed millions of users to reconsider the operating system they had accepted as a default for years. Microsoft's decision to exclude hundreds of millions of functioning machines from Windows 11 based on hardware requirements was the largest involuntary Linux recommendation in the platform's history. The machines Microsoft told users to replace are running Linux right now. They are running faster than they ran on Windows 10. Their owners are not buying new computers. If you are watching this on a machine that Microsoft told you was not good enough for Windows 11, the case for trying Linux is not ideological. It is financial, it is practical, and it is confirmed by the 70% of users who made the same decision in 2025 and are still running it. Download the ISO, write the USB, boot it live. That is the entire commitment required to find out whether Linux is the answer to what Microsoft took away from you.